Would you guys? Ooh.
We went to St. Catherine's to brand new shoes, which moved onto Lake Street from where they were. But at least they didn't move that long ago. They only moved in July or June or something.
Okay.
So he's got new shoes.
Oh,
Yeah.
there they are, wow.
Yeah, the old ones, I have a hip replacement, right?
Yeah.
So the new ones, the old ones were my old walking style.
Right.
And I was feeling a dip,
Yeah.
Right.
so these kind of lifted me up and
Nice.
more balanced.
Right. Okay. All right on.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good to have a nice pair of shoes.
Yeah.
You know.
I went to Rockaway Falls today and did some hiking there, and
Nice.
it was really fun. Got to it was kind of pretty hard to do. Like I had to like jump on some rocks and things. And
Right. Right. With those shoes or?
Oh
No.
Other shoes.
Yeah. So.
Here, try this. I ate the apple, sorry. I just picked it
Okay.
up.
So what we're going to do is I think we're just going to start today, and I'm just opening up. So yeah, I think I'll just lead in prayer. You know, I've never actually led in prayer before, so we'll just see how it goes. Dear Lord, thank you for this wonderful opportunity you've given us to get together and share in the knowledge of you and in the knowledge of the world that you created. Please be with us during this evening. Please facilitate our discussions and allow them to be centered on you and the world that you've created. Forgive us for all our sins. In Christ's name, amen.
Amen.
Okay, so the first presenter, we're going to have Chris present. And what's your topic for tonight?
It'll be Heraclitus, the one and the many.
Okay, well, that sounds exciting. And then Joanne, you had something you wanted to prepare as well.
Yeah, it wasn't what I talked about to you last week.
Right.
I'm continuing on with the book that I started.
Okay, oh, wonderful. Okay,
Last month.
cool. John, so I forgot that Joanne is presenting. Were you planning on presenting today?
No, I mean, I guess I can only have something prepared if you need to.
Okay, well,
Very partial.
okay, so you're not really on the fence. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll just have yours for next week, and I'm going to present something short today as well. So we're going to Chris, Joanne, and maybe if there's time at the end, I want to share a little bit on the book that I was reading, Augustine. And another thing too is I want to encourage, you know, does everybody, who here has a book that they're currently reading? Raise your hand.
Only one? I'm always reading something. I have
Yeah.
about 10.
Everybody.
I'll let you know I know how to read.
Right.
I just don't read.
Okay.
So that's why I don't have a book. I'm currently reading.
Right.
You do podcasts, talk about that.
Yeah.
True.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. Like reading, sometimes it does take some discipline. But once you get into it, you know, what I like to use is one of those e-readers. It's a little pocket. You know, it's not as clumsy as bringing a book around everywhere with you. And you know, sometimes I'm preparing coffee or I'm making food. I just start reading it, and it's not so much because some books I read and it's, you know, I'm taking notes and preparing for a presentation. But other books, what I like to do is I just like to read it and just kind of enjoy it, right? And yeah, it's a lot less intense, and it's not so much philosophical, or no, it's not so much novels I read. It's more, I guess, nonfiction. But anyway, you know, whatever works for you. But yeah, I want to encourage, you know, this technically is a book club, and so it would be great if some other people, a part of this club, are as willing to share anything about you know, it doesn't have to be a full half an hour presentation. It could be 5 minutes. It could be simple as you know, coming up here. What is the book? What's the main point? And why should we be interested, right? If it's just something simple, I think that'd be great. So anyway, without further ado, I'm going to invite Chris up here.
I could turn that on if I can get through here. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
But here's how to do it, everybody.
Yeah.
Here's the remote. There's the power button, and you have to point it directly at it and see. Okay, that did work. Changes
Nice.
the light
Yeah.
to-
Changes the light. Thanks. Thanks, Sean. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to be talking about, firstly, a word that's been on my mind as of late, and then I'm going to then give kind of a formal presentation on the philosopher Heraclitus. And I'm going to try to weave everything together to help make sense for me on some ideas that I've been thinking about as of late. So firstly, I want to talk about this word, and it comes up in the New Testament. How many times does it come up? It says, I think. Oh, it's used 86 times in the New Testament. And it's used, it's roughly translated to mean time. So this is the word kairos. However, it's a very special sense of time. So, So this is how Mark uses it in 1:15. He says, "The kairos is fulfilled, and the kingdom of God is at hand." And Jesus also makes a distinction in John 7:6 between his time and his brother's time. This Wikipedia passage says it is always his brother's time. So here's the interesting thing. So kairos means an opportune time or a moment of an action or a moment of a decision. However, it's time that is not used in the sense that we normally think of this. The Greeks have a word for the time that we normally think of, time as kind of calculable, time as measurable. The time that has 24 hours in a day, the time that I look at my watch and say it's 8 p.m. Right? Can't read my time. Yeah, it's 8 p.m. So it's that kind of time, or it's the time where I say, the time is now, sort of thing. That's that's chronos, and that's used 54 times in the New Testament. So, as this Wikipedia passage says, kairos means the appointed time in the purpose of God. And why I've been so fascinated with this word is this very special time spends the time being used. It's the time where we feel as the moment is right for us to do something. Joanne last week made a really interesting comment where we were talking about this split second that we have in where we want to either deter from an action, deter doing an action, or doing an action that we can't do. There's a split second between when I act and kind of that moment of determination where, let's say, for the sake of it, that my brain signals kind of clamp down and say, that action is going to happen. Fate has been deemed in that sense. So I want to make everyone think about time in general. Because I can ask in a very abstract way and ask, when will be the time when we change our lives? Something like that. Like when will change happen for us? We can think of that in the sense of chronos, in the sense of a calculable time. Let's say the change of my life will happen next Tuesday or something. Or I can think of it in the sense of this this time that is drawn out of me in where I say that the moment is now for me to change my own life, and then I do something about it. Thinking about time in that sense, to me, opens up this radical way of understanding your own life. That the time is now to do something about something that I want to change about my own life. Yeah. So maybe we can move on, Dan, to the next slide. Oh, you're recording, which is good. Yeah, thanks. That's great to be recording. I want to return to this though, because I feel like this is really important. But I want to start by presenting on some of the fragments of Heraclitus. So this is Heraclitus was a philosopher. He was alive in the late 500 BC. And they don't have any actual writings from him. So what happened is that you had this huge burning down of Alexandria, which was a huge library that had all these books in it. And what happened is that his book got destroyed in that. But the books that were not in Alexandria when it was getting burned down, some of them wrote passages, or they cited passages from him. So they all think that Heraclitus wrote an actual book, but they have fragments of his book in other writers who were writing about him and citing him. So it's an interesting thing. Like, we're going to read some of his fragments today, and we'll have to keep in mind that this was situated in a broader context of a book that he was writing. But we only have to work with parts of that book. So it's a tricky kind of thing to deal with. This is all we have to work with. And that's like a separate issue on its own. It's kind of a really tricky thing to deal with, but we're going to try to look at some of his fragments today and see what was he up to and what he was thinking about. So you can move on to the first fragment. So this is one of the first fragments from Heraclitus. This is what he writes in the Greek. Selephis, ola kai ok ola sim pheromonon diaphora menon synodon diadon kai ek panton hen kai ek enos. Oh, sorry?
That's Greek to me.
Yeah, so that's the Greek, right? So what it means is graspings. Things whole and not whole. What is drawn together and what is drawn asunder. The harmonious and the discordant. The one is made up of all things, and all things issue from the one. So this is an ancient kind of topic that we're going to try to explore today and get into the guts of. It's this distinction between the one and then the many. Between being and also beings. Between things such as the piano and the table and the people in this room and all that. But then the one thing that kind of gathers all of those things together to make one unifying thing out of them. So I'd like to ask everyone and open the floor. What do you possibly think that Heraclitus could be talking about in this fragment here? Why would this be an important thing to talk about? He's talking about this the harmonious on one side, the things that are in harmony, and then the discordant on the other side. He's saying that these things there's actually some kind of, let's say, grouping between these things, let's say a tension between these things. what do you think he could be talking about? Lynn?
What comes to my mind right off the bat is something similar to yin and yang.
Yeah.
Where there's a balance and there's opposites, and they come together, but then they don't. Like,
Yeah.
they're not the same. They're totally different, but they balance each other out.
Yeah. So that's really, really good. Heraclitus is known as the philosopher of opposites. And hopefully I can do a part 2 of Heraclitus and show you some of the opposites that he draws. He likes to draw a lot of between the sun and the moon, between the harmonious and the discordant. He always likes to talk about these opposites that are in tension with each other, that are trying to reach some resolve. That's a really good comment, Lynn. I want to share something that was really strange that happened to me as I started to read Heraclitus. What would happen is that I found myself being able to do things easier. What I mean to say is that I would find it easier to, let's say, I'm going to name these trivial actions of jumping into the cold shower, or waking up at 4 a.m. and going to the gym, and all these.
Is that what you do?
Yeah, sometimes. Yeah, I've been trying to do that as of late. Yeah, I was finding it like easier, more smoothly, more intuitively, more flexibly. I was able to do things easier. And I'm gonna try to break down how that happened, because this is the power of what people have called a cosmology. It's thinking about the entire universe, and how you're a part of that, how you're playing a part in this universal process. So let's go to the next fragment, and try to connect the first one to the second one. So Heraclitus says, "Hen to sophon, epistestai nomen oten eku ber nese panta dia panton." Wisdom is one thing. It is to know the thought by which all things are steered through all things. And could you go to the last fragment, Daniel? And this is in fragment 64. And again, these are not arranged. No one knows any clue about the sequence of these fragments. Whether, say, fragment 10 came before fragment 64. These are all coming from different sources and books. But he says the thunderbolt that steers all things. Tade panta oikase kernos. And it's interesting because Daniel drew a thunderbolt today in your painting. What inspired you to draw a thunderbolt, Daniel?
Well, it's the art style of Batman the Animated Series.
Sorry?
Batman the Animated Series art style.
Oh, okay.
It's the Dark Knight with the legend.
Now that's an interesting thing. Now let's think about the implications of this one fragment, the thunderbolt that steers through all things. You can go to the next slide. So imagine you're in this dark night, and this is a paint drawing that I made, by the way. I drew this. But yeah, so imagine that you're in this dark night, and you can't see anything. All the things, like let's say you're in this room and then there's no lights on. What you wouldn't see anything, right? You'd have all these things in front of you, but it would just be blackness and kind of this. It's shrouded in mist, right? There's nothing. You can't see anything. And then let me scrap being in this room. Let's go back outside because it's going to work with a thunderbolt because that will make sense if we're in this room. So imagine you're in a field, and then it's in the dark, you can't see anything, and then a thunderbolt kind of slashes through, kind of tears open the sky. as this sky is torn open, all the things kind of light up. All the things flash and they illuminate, and all the things come into the appearance. So as lightning bolt tears through the sky, the things are like the plane of grass comes into its own appearance. The trees and the mountains and the stars, they all come into appearance. There is two different kinds of things. What happens is that as this lightning bolt tears through the sky, it splendors or it lights up everything. So it's radiating light. But then you also have the things that are resplendered, or they are using the light of the lightning bolt to light up. So if you can go back to the last slide, Daniel. Oh, that's the next slide. Right. The last one. Right. So
What resplends?
yeah. So on this dark night, the splendor is the lightning, but then what resplends is the things. So that would be the mountains and the valleys and the streams and the rivers. Right. So this is the thing we have to think about, right? So in this moment, there is the things are lighting up, right? You're seeing the streams and the rivers and the forests and the tree, right? But there's Heraclitus is trying to draw on something that is bringing those things into their appearance, if that makes sense. So I can label something, oh, that's a stream when this lightning flash comes down. Oh, that's a tree. Oh, that's a mountain. But the lightning, it brings the thing into its appearing for me to see before I can make an outline of those things.
So this is how he reconciles.
Cool.
This is how he reconciles the one and the many.
So
This is the image that essentially of reconciliation, how the one and the many resolve themselves. The one illuminates the many.
yeah, exactly. So the one is illuminating the many, indeed. That's how we should understand this grasping, though. Things whole and not whole. What is drawn together and what is drawn asunder. The harmonious and the discordant. The one is made up of all things, and all things issue from the one. He's trying to draw into how something is as those trees and mountains and hills all come into appearance, we can say that what creation is doing is it's rendering those things to be brought forth for us to see. Meaning to say that creation is something that is not yet a thing. Meaning to say that, as we say in sorry?
Yeah. Do you want to finish your thought? Then I'll.
Yeah. So we hear it in Genesis that in the beginning was the Word. This Word was not yet a thing. So before God was kind of hovering over the sort of hovering in this, I want to call it non-existence, before he created the sea and the land and the that process is not yet put into being. What I mean by that is that process is not a thing itself, right? God creating land and the sea is not itself the sea as of yet, because it's in the process of being created. Yeah, Sean.
It's like, in order for there to be change, there has to be time. Time allows change to bring things together as whole.
That's really powerful. That's really powerful, Sean.
Everything is broken, comes together as one, but time allows that to happen. Change.
This is something that I'm really trying to understand right now. There's something with creation and destruction and time itself. Time seems to be, as you're mentioning, putting things into play and then withdrawing them back, and then putting things into play and withdrawing them. And what it's doing is that it's allotting time, but then it's taking time away. And if we think about life and death, that is what life and death is in its essence. It's proportioning time, and then it's reaping that time back in, kind of like the Grim Reaper as he as he pulls in with his scythe the life that he takes. This is the power of what a cosmology is. Yes, Matt.
I just want to get back to what a comment that I was going to make. So it sounds like what you're saying and what Heraclitus, or your reading of Heraclitus is saying, is that, that we as observers of sort of the landscape,
Yeah.
In the midst of the lightning storm,
Yeah.
we participate in the act of creation.
Yeah.
So we become, it's something comes to be as the light illuminates and as we perceive the light.
Yeah, exactly. And this is, and the one and the many, Heraclitus is trying to kind of reach into the very, I want to say, between of the one of the lightning flash illuminating the sky and kind of bringing everything into appearance, and the things as they come into their outlines as distinguished things. I want to go to the one last fragment, which will be the last picture. It'll be a funny picture. So Heraclitus says, and this relates directly to what you just said, Matt. If all things were turned to smoke, the nostrils would distinguish them. So this is an interesting thing. So imagine that there's this smoke. Imagine that a fire has happened and there's this smoke in front of you, this shroud of mist of the smoke in front of you. Imagine that there are things that are concealed or hidden within that smoke, such as a person and a chicken and some other thing I drew that I don't remember. The thing at the bottom. I don't know what that is. I think it was another chicken, like another. I couldn't think of anything else to draw, so I drew two chickens and a person. So Heraclitus says that if all the things in that smoke were turned to smoke, of course the things in there are not smoke, right? They're things. The chicken is in there, in the smoke, and the person's in the smoke. But he says if they were turned to smoke, if we could no longer see them, the nostrils or our sense of smell would be able to distinguish them. And this is a very fascinating thing that we have to unpack. So, as Matt was just saying, there's this in-between process in that flash of lightning in where everything is lit up and those things are brought into appearance. So, yeah, so Heraclitus wants to say that even if I couldn't see the outlines of those things, even if let's say the lightning flash did happen, and let's say the valleys and the hills and the rivers and the trees are all forming, but let's say that I still can't make them out. That I still can't understand what the thing is in its finished form. Because let's say that I just can't see the mountain coming into appearance and me then saying, oh, that distinguishing, saying that's the mountain. What Heraclitus wants to say is that even if I couldn't see that final form of the mountain, I would still know that it was a mountain. Does that make sense? I'll say that again if it doesn't make sense.
Well, it sounds like what you're saying is that, and I think I agree, and I think this is how a lot of the ancient philosophers and even the theologians would talk about the sense experience, is that our senses participate in being, right?
It's always said this.
So if we didn't have eyesight,
Yeah.
we only had a sense of smell. It's our sense of smell that's going to help us to navigate through the world. Like a bat doesn't have a sense of sight. It uses like a sonar.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah,
So
that's.
our experiences are the way that we perceive the world dictates how the world discloses itself to us.
Yeah, exactly.
I have to take this.
Yeah, no worries. So just to recapitulate what Matt just said, Matt said that even if I can't see if I was to go back to that example, I keep bringing it up, but I'm going to try to use this. So, and work with it. So, in that example of the lightning opening up the sky, let's just take one object. Let's just take the mountain. The example that I used in my slide. The mountain's on the right side. So, as Matt was saying, I am participating in making that thing the thing. So, let's say I couldn't tell that was a mountain, but the mountain was I'm not sure how to say this, Matt. So I think you said it really well. There's this halfway point that seems to be there between the thing in its final form and us creating that thing from nothing.
Yeah, so there's a sense in which, and I think this is how Christians conceptualize the idea that the kingdom of God is coming, but the kingdom of God is already within us. So there's a sense of already and not yet. It's already there, but we are developing it. And by participating in the world, we are essentially, to use Christian, because Heraclitus is not a Christian, but Christians would say that by participating in the world, particularly through the sacramental acts, which is a multi-sensory experience, we are crowning the created order. So we're participating in the created order.
Yeah.
So our sensory experiences dictate how the world discloses itself to us.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I guess there's something happening between us and the world. Something new is being formed when we engage in the world.
Yeah.
So the things of the world truly become as they are as we engage with it.
Yeah.
That's what I think is happening.
Yeah.
I guess just to add on, if you're perceiving something, right, your perception might be different. Your perception, but the lightning, whatever, brings it into more reality. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like that,
So you can't separate the light. It's hard to talk about these things. It's foreign the way that we understand the world. But when a tree comes to fruition, okay, there's various events that could happen tree. It can weather the storms, it can do this. But it grows in being as we are there to contemplate the beauty of the tree, right? So a tree becomes beautiful as we, as somebody who can appreciate beauty, encounters it. So it's, as the tree develops, our encounter of it becomes a part of its development into a being, a fully flourishing tree, right? Yeah, and I think, but if we see the lightning essentially as God, as illuminating the world, it's the same thing. It's, something comes to be as God sees it, as God creates it. The Christians would say ex nihilo. I don't think, like out of nothing. I don't think Heraclitus believed in this kind of out of nothingness, right?
He says topon, which he thinks is the universe, and some people, so he calls the, we'll go over this next time, but it's the pir ezon, which is the eternal living fire, which is kindled in measures and quenched in measures.
Right. So Heraclitus, for Christians, it's creation ex nihilo, right? So the one doesn't just illuminate the world, the one creates the world for Christians. But for Heraclitus and a lot of pagans, the universe is eternal, and the one, or God, still illuminates the world, or brings it into greater being. Anyway, that's how actually, so one last thing. The ancients also used, when they would call eyesight as rays of light. They would talk about eyesight as essentially emitting rays of light from our eyes, much like lightning.
That's what Plato talks about eyesight as. He whenever he's talking about to agathon, or the good, he's always using sight as the look, which is the idean, to speak about that. And you're totally right that the sensory experience of light, he's trying to draw on this really something that is so fundamental to our own existence that so the thing is that when I talk about this analogy of the lightning bolt, it's an analogy. It's trying to hit on something that is so essential and fundamental to our everyday life, where we are constantly dealing with decisions that we have to make, choices that we have to make. That's what I was saying before, where when I started to read Heraclitus, it was giving me an impetus to do actions that I felt like I couldn't do before. And it comes from looking in a place within yourself that you wouldn't normally be looking at. Daniel, would you have Google Chrome on hand? Could you look up fragment 1 from Heraclitus? Because this, oh yeah, sure.
Sir, we do have to wrap things up shortly.
Okay, yeah.
Because it's been half an hour.
Yeah. Can I read one more? Just one more thing, and then wrap it up? I'll go be really quick. I just want to read one more thing. This is really essential to Heraclitus. He talks about the logos, or the word. Fragment 1 from Heraclitus, yeah. And he says that we're going about our day-to-day activities, our day-to-day life, and there's something that we don't know, but is something that is so in front of us that if we were to see it, things would click and make sense for us. It would be that kairos, or that moment in where things click, or that moment in where the time is right. Cool. Yeah, I'll just read this. So, though this word is true evermore, yet men are as unable to understand it when they hear it for the first time as before they have heard it at all. For though all things come to pass in accordance with this word, men seem as if they had no experience of them when they make trial of words and deeds, such as I set forth, dividing each thing according to its kind and showing how it truly is. But other men know not what they are doing when awake, even as though what they do in sleep. That last part's very important. He's saying that men don't know what they're doing when they're awake, as if that's equivalent to what's happening when we're sleeping and we're in our dreams. And it's like, what even is all this in our dreams? That's the same thing as what he's saying as it is for waking life when we're awake. I'd like to do a part 2 of Heraclitus because he's a very amazing thinker. But yeah, that's my presentation.
Okay, well, a couple weeks ago, a month ago, I pulled out this book, and it seemed to have hit a nerve or something that most people could identify with, because I noticed Dan sprinkled a few things about that in his sermons the last couple of weeks, and today he practically took my whole presentation in his sermon. But just to do a summary, if any of you weren't here, this book talks about how we often find ourselves being forced or inclined to behave in ways that are not good for us. Or we don't do things that are good for us, even though we know we should. We just can't seem to put into practice what we know is best for our overall lives. And why is that? And the scriptures talk about that too. Romans 7 is the tongue twister verses that say, I don't do what I know I should do, and the things I don't want to do, that's what I do. And there's something in me, it's a law in me that's fighting against the law of my mind. And this book has been written by 2 medical doctors to do with the brain science. And they see this as well. It's not a faith-based book, but I think if we can put this together with other ideas in our lives, especially our faith, we have a really powerful way to improve our lives and to give more glory to God with them. So just to go past what just go over what I said the last time. We often live on unwanted autopilot, I guess would be the way of putting it. And we have what we call kind of like I think Dan put it once a few weeks ago, monkey brain. It's our animal nature. It's the part of us that is quick and efficient and only focused on immediate survival or relief or comfort. Doesn't matter about the future. We got to survive this moment, because if we don't survive this moment, there's going to be no future. So this is where addictions come in, because we can't see ourselves getting through the next moments unless we partake of whatever it is we're addicted to, or things that really cause us problems. And what are they, and what do we do about them? First of all, we need to be aware of them. And one of the parts of the discussion after I presented last time was really insightful. Someone said, this is all great, it sounds good, but it's not enough. Because it doesn't work. Because it all requires self-discipline, and we don't have it. We don't have enough of it. Yes?
I think that if I was to think about how I would respond in that situation, the problem for me is thinking about like rules or principles that I can just kind of draw on in that moment to just stop myself and say, oh yes, rule number 1 is reframe. Rule number is
Yes.
right? That to me is the problem, because I'm so kind of drawn into whatever I want to do, whether it's eating potato chips or indulging in something that's not good for me.
Yes.
That I can't stop. I simply can't resist. I simply can't stop myself. And how do I get the mental energy to stop and then think about that the principle to then apply that and then
Yes, yes, in order to be able to step back.
yeah.
Right, good point. Well, I found a really interesting quote by someone. Said, I don't know who it's by. There are 2 problems with self-discipline: self and discipline. That's because yet we are to take every thought captive to the obedience of Christ. As a man thinks, so is he. These are all Bible verses. And we are to train our minds, train our bodies. Actually, Apostle Paul says, I make my body my slave so that after preaching to others, I might not be a castaway. I make my body my slave. I make myself do what I know should be done or not do what shouldn't be done. How do we do that? Well, it's buried in Scripture, but I love science, and so this book resonates with me. So putting them together, I think what came up last time was the thing missing from this is love. The power of love. It's like that lightning bolt that illuminates and empowers everything, because God is love. So God, or love, is the lightning bolt. Self-discipline, self-control, it's what some people call, it's one of the fruits of the Spirit. Well, I look at that verse about the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, It's not 9 things, it's 1 thing. It's love, and the aspects are joy, peace, gentleness, kindness, self-control. Self-control is one part of love, but it's not the whole thing. We need the whole thing. And only God is the whole thing, but we are been told to love God wholeheartedly and love our neighbor as ourselves. That's the greatest commandment, but it's really 2. But it's 1. It's 2, but it's 1. So love God, love ourselves, so that we can love others. Because we can't love others if we don't love ourselves. The thing about these, what the book calls deceptive brain messages, that we believe things that are incorrect about ourselves and we don't realize it. And this is what invisibly directs us to do things that are not healthy for us. And where do they come from? That's what the chapter is about that I'm going to present on tonight. Because when you bring love into the situation, and if love is the empowering, illuminating thing that makes everything work together, that gives us the ability to see what we're doing and to see, okay, I can remember the rules now, if you want to put it that way, but we can't do that if we don't have the ability to step back and look. But if our deceptive brain messages, I prefer to call it the defective brain messages. Deceptive sounds kind of malicious and sneaky, but it's not that. We all believe things that are untrue about ourselves, not because someone's tried to deceive us, but it's just a natural consequence of living in this world, being parented by imperfect parents, being taught by imperfect teachers, having older siblings who, sometimes they're selfish, dealing with coaches, anyone who, when we were young, they were our caregivers or someone we looked up to or depended on. And in our young, immature, growing brains, we think, well, they're always right. I mean, we believe Santa Claus comes down the chimney and all the houses around the whole world in one night. We believe that. I believe that. Because this person that I look up to said so. And that's good enough for me. I didn't research it. As an adult, we can do these things. We can look at things more objectively and holistically. But as a kid, we can't. And so we have all got some messages in our subconscious brains that are steering us wrong. The trick is, how do we find out what that message is and where it came from? And once we know that, we can then start to recognize it when it pops up in our lives. And that gives us power. What gives us even more power is if we bring love into the situation in some way. But the problem is, if we have messages that are telling us we're not lovable, we're not worth the effort of trying to challenge these defective brain messages, because it takes energy to combat them, to identify them, and to start turning away from them and forming new habits, new brain neuroplasticity, they call it. If we don't believe that we're lovable, we won't bother with any of it. So together, they can help us. So how do we start? We have this distorted view of ourselves because of the past. And it's not because people in our past didn't love us. Some of them maybe didn't love us, but they had their own things they were dealing with. Our parents had parents of their own who were imperfect, who had parents of their own who were imperfect. I'm just going to read one example in the book. There's a number of them. This one's the shortest. It's about a guy named Ed. He realized that his mother, I got the right spot, yes. He realized that his mother acted toward him when he was a child with a message that told him he was of no value. She never treated me like I was important, unless I did something that made her look good and the bar was high. For example, excelling in artistry meant nothing to her, only as academic grades did. Unless I had A+ across the board, she would reprimand me and ask why I had not done better. She never accepted or praised him for his artistic accomplishments. Apparently he was artistic. No matter how many parents remarked at how talented he was or how they wished they had a son like him. Nothing was ever good enough for her, which left me perpetually feeling like a second-class citizen. So as soon as he accepts and internalizes that message from his mother, which as a young child, there's really no other option because you don't have the experience or the objectivity to do otherwise, that he had no inherent value, this devastating, deceptive brain message was formed in him and has plagued him to avoid many things in his life, including auditions, asking women out for dates. He lived a limited life because he believed that he had no value. Until he was able to see that this was my mom's message, not mine. He was able to see that. It's not who I am. Once he realized that for all these years he'd been under the thumb of her deceptive message, one he had incorporated into his own sense of self, he felt grief for the lost time, but also incredible relief. Seeing the truth, he was liberated. As Jesus said, you will know the truth and the truth will set you free. He no longer believed he was mandated to follow his brain's erroneous message. He was able to start putting himself out there and creating a new life for himself. As Scripture says, we're to become new creations. We have to think differently so that we can be differently. So what this book has was a number of charts. I put a few of them together, and I made this chart. Let's see if I covered everything here. I'll get to the chart in a minute. Let me finish what I've got here. So we need to be seen. It's a human need to be seen, heard, understood, and loved for who we are, and to be able to express our emotions and our needs to the important people in our lives. Many children don't have that opportunity. But as caregivers, as a parent myself, I know I didn't do that 100% for my children because I have my own baggage to deal with. You know, I have my marriage to deal with. I had other things going on, and so I was not perfect for all 4 of my kids. But the good news is, according to research, even if a caregiver is 50% there for their child or a teacher or a coach or an older sibling, that child will be able to go into adulthood with a lot of good, healthy tools for coping with life. But if it's less than 50%, that kid's got baggage. When they grow up, they have a lot of defective brain messages to deal with. So thankfully, we don't have to be perfect to be good enough. So the title of this chapter is Ignoring, Minimizing, and Neglecting: How Deceptive Brain Messages Distort Your View of Yourself. If we've been ignored, minimized, or neglected during our formative years by people who we could not objectively understand as being, you know, that's them, it's not me, we would just accept that, and that it was true, and we would take it personally and apply that to ourselves and treat ourselves as adults the way we were treated as kids, without investigating, without even thinking that we were doing it. It's just an automatic internalization. So from our childhood, even our early adulthood, how we were treated by parents, teachers, coaches, any important person in our lives is the way we learn to treat ourselves. And we think about ourselves that way, but it's so internalized we don't even realize we're doing it. We need to realize we're doing it, then we have the power to step back. We want to love ourselves enough to do that, and if we've been neglected and minimized, the message is we're not worth loving. So it's this catch-22, and we have to realize maybe I'm worth it. Not that I'm something special, but it's okay to question the fact that I think I'm not good enough, or whatever it is. So once we become aware of these defective brain messages, where they originated and the triggers we now have, that kind of stirs them up and causes us to then launch into doing this unhealthy response, we then have the ability to step back and look. And if we also inject love in there in some way, and I like what Dan put in the sermon this morning, I never heard of it, visualize ourselves in a situation in our past where we were not treated properly, and imagine Jesus there with us, with his hand on our shoulder and, you know, loving us through it. And if we can imagine that, I got to try that enough times, then when we're in a situation similar, when this defective brain message is, you know, throwing itself at us in the current day, we might automatically think of Jesus with us now and say, he died for me. I don't have to believe this message that I was wrongly given. It's just inaccurate. It's not maliciously given, but I understood it wrongly. And now I want to fix that with God's help. I can pray, God loves me. He is love. And we can't love ourselves or others unless we feel God's love for us. Because we love because he first loved us. So we have to somehow get love in there, and it sort of opens the window and gives us that breath of fresh air to give us the power. So the chart that I have, I'll pass them around. I'll give you some. And you, well, I guess I'm connected here. Sorry, thank you. Now I looked at this, was yesterday or the day before, and I'm thinking, I don't know how I'm ever going to fill this out. But amazingly, as I slept last night, and you say we don't remember what we think of when we're sleeping, But I woke up this morning with some ideas to put in here for myself. So there's three rows. We all have more than one defective brain message going on at the same time. But anyway, pick one, and it's in the reverse order. So the first column says the problem is the unhealthy habitual response. The problem, the thing that we want to not do, or the thing that we do want to do that we don't do. Whatever that is, you can put that in. And then they're typically accompanied by an uncomfortable sensation or emotion. Fear, palpitations. Those are the ones that I'm familiar with. There could be others. I don't know what someone else might have an idea. And then what triggers that in my life today? Then we can sort of work it backwards and logically think, well, what's the defective brain message that might be going on here? And find out what that is. You put down some ideas, and then this is the part that took some time for me, is thinking of where in earlier life would I have gotten that idea? And it's not just pulling it out of the air, but try to think of a person or a voice or a situation, a particular one, or repeated ones, similar. And just let that sit, and something may surface. And I found that's what happened with me. So I'm going to share with you. So it's really going from right to left is the progression in time. But for me, it was easier to fill it out from left to right because I can't start it. I have to go that way to find it. So I'm going to share one of them with you. My problem, and I know Dave knows this, I am a people pleaser. I don't like to make people upset with me. I don't like it when people are upset with me. There's nothing wrong with pleasing people. I mean, we're supposed to be peaceable with all men and do our best to get along with people, but it can be excessive. And I think that's one of my problems. I know that's one of my problems. And so what I wrote under there is, I'm a people pleaser. When I sense a conflict or a disagreement with someone who is important to me, I kind of cower and I look down and I kind of want to disappear and I say nothing and I kind of hope it goes away. Like I run away from it. The uncomfortable sensation I have is fear. And even though there's nothing bad happening, this is what's happening inside of me. The trigger is whenever I perceive a conflict may occur or is occurring, and it could just be that someone's not feeling well, so they just walked past me without saying anything and didn't pay me attention, and they were just kind of miserable, and I thought, I take it personally. It's nothing to do with me at all, but I thought it had something to do with me, so I go through all these things for nothing. And it's usually with somebody who's important to me or equal or, in my mind, bigger than me, more important. So my defective brain message, which I need to, as Dan said, let go of from my past, is that when someone's upset with me, they can hurt me. Because I'm afraid. I'm afraid of something, so I must be afraid that something's going to hurt me. And nothing else matters until they like me again. Like everything else has to go to the wayside until this gets fixed. And I don't know how to fix it because I'm too scared to fix it. So I'm stuck. And so the possible origin, I thought about my mother. My mother died when I was 17. And I was never close with her. We'd never had conversations where she would ask me questions about how I thought about something and she would listen. And I didn't have any of those Olivia Walton mother things going on at all. She never said bad things to me or called me names, but if she didn't like something I was doing or one of my siblings, she would yell. And she wouldn't yell obscenities or anything. She would just talk really loud and say, do this. I told you to do this. Whatever it is. And I remember when I was, 2 years old, my brother, who might have been 4, he got in trouble somehow. And so my mom spanked him with the wooden spoon. And I was hiding behind the chair watching. And, you know, it wasn't pretty. She even broke the spoon on his back behind. And I'm thinking, oh, I'm never going to do anything to make that happen again. I'm going to be really good. I'm going to make sure she's happy with me all the time. So I thought, that's probably where this is coming from. And then in my first marriage, very early, I was 19 years old. We were first married. I did something innocently enough that I thought he would be happy with. And it turned out he was really upset about, and he did the same thing that my mother did. Just all of a sudden, he's yelling at me. It's like, what's this? And he never apologized. And I'm thinking, so people that are important in my life have frightened me with their anger or just their lack of ability to settle conflict in a healthy way. It's not because I'm not worthy of that, it's because that's all they knew how to do. And so that makes sense to me now. When I start to feel that feeling, I want to try to remember these situations with Jesus with me and realize this is not my message. I don't have to please everybody, otherwise I'll be hurt. People are going to be upset with me, and it's okay. I'll survive just fine. I'm not trying to upset them. They're upset because of something to do with them more than with me. So these are objective things I can now try to think about when this starts to happen. So fill out the forms if you wish. And that's one of them. I have another one, which is, I don't want to take the time, but it doesn't have to be something as serious as that. It could just be something silly, like I'm always pulling my ear. Why do I do this? Like anything. But the exercise of doing this and bringing love into it. So that's chapter 6 of 15. Stay tuned for chapter 7 when I get around to it. Okay, thank you.
So did other people get excited too when we're doing these presentations? I feel like we're learning a lot. I'm always excited. It's funny because during the week I got to prepare a presentation, and then I kind of half-heartedly prepare it. But once I'm here, I'm like, I wish I spent more time preparing it. I wish because I'm always really excited when we come together and we start talking about these sorts of things, right? But I don't have much time. Are you gonna get the picture up there?
12-year-old boys.
Don't worry, Dan, your birthday will be tomorrow.
Okay, I'll just start. So I want to start just with asking, when you guys think about the self, we talked, I think the last book was "You Are Not Your Brain," right? But really, what do you guys think? What does it mean if you ever asked yourself or ever told yourself, I want to go soul searching, or I want to go find myself? What does that look like? Have any ideas?
I've never understood that phrase.
It's kind of like elusive, yeah. It's kind of.
It's a mirror.
It's
Find yourself, and then there you are.
right.
From there, yeah, a mirror maybe.
In a mirror. Okay, so that's what it makes you think of, right?
That's what I think of. Yeah, go find yourself. Oh, I'm missing.
Yeah.
There I am.
What makes you happy?
Yeah, okay. So what I think of traveling, right? People go find, what was that one song? It's often on the radio. I want to go find myself, but I never realized I lost myself. I forgot. It's a popular song. I don't know the name, but it's out there, right? But this book by Augustine, it's called The Confessions. And The Confessions is the autobiography of Augustine of Hippo. And Augustine is a Catholic bishop in North Africa in the late 300s to early 400s AD. The Confessions is an autobiographical work, but what sets it apart is that it's not addressed to any human readership, but rather this autobiography is written as a prayer to God. So this entire book rests on the theological insight that knowledge of self is impossible without knowledge of God, and knowledge of God is impossible without knowledge of self. For Augustine, our quest for the self parallels our quests for God. Now, maybe I want to ask you, so do you see any parallels between our quest for the self and our quest for God? I see some heads nodding. What do you think? Like, what do you think is the parallel?
Well, if we're made in God's image, maybe deep down what we want is what God wants.
Yeah, and that's exactly, I think you summed up Augustine's main, like, overall philosophical project is that, what we really... Yeah, why read the Confessions? It seems like it seems almost like Sunday school, But and I think that's because Augustine, he's a towering figure in Western philosophy, and it's a shame that a lot of people don't really know him. It's a shame it's not really taught at universities, and he's a towering figure in Western philosophy, and a lot of especially our theological concepts, come from an Augustinian sense of desire. Right? We desire God because he first desired us.
To connect it with Joanne's last presentation, this one psychologist says that at the root of every addiction is trauma. To go with what Joanne was saying, in those moments of addiction, say drug addiction or substance addiction, what happens is that, as Joanne was saying, people have foundational self-concept of themselves where they've learned or identified with themselves this who am I about themselves. But this who am I is not as if it's kind of like I'm going to look inside of myself and see who I am, but the who am I-ness, it's an essence. It's something that is there in all of the actions that person does, whether it's getting giddy about the addiction and then going through with the action, and then all that who am I-ness is attached to all those specific actions. And it's weird, as Joanne was saying, that attached to that who am I-ness is that message. That message could be, say, I'm a bad person, and as they're going through with the addiction, in that momentary sense of trying to escape in that one sole moment, that message is I'm a bad person who can't. I'm a terrible person. Say a person of no worth who cannot do anything but indulge in this one moment because of how sick of myself that I am with my own life.
Yeah.
So just to connect, so then you have to ask, what is it on the basis of which I can get out of that way of being, get out of that way of finding myself in that message, and that would be essentially God. That would, because you're trying to get to the very heart of, on the basis of which, on the basis of what am I doing the action that I'm doing. When you see God, God can intervene in that action itself. And then you realize that God is the absolute sumens ons. I'm not sure if that's Aquinas or Augustine. Sumens ons means supreme entity. It means the very absolute core upon which the whole background of your existence is established on.
Yeah, no, and you're 100% right. and a lot of what you said, I think we're going to draw on when we discuss Augustine a little bit more. But this is probably going to be a two-part presentation as well, because there's a lot to say about this book, but there's no way to go through it all. So just as God is paradoxically present with us, yet seemingly distant or elusive, right? Our own selves is the same kind of paradox. Our self is here, but where is it, right? So we see a parallel between the quest for the self and a quest for God, and they seem almost the same. So an autobiography is a method of gathering the fragments of ourselves, our lost memories. So Augustine's Confessions in the later part of the book, he really reflects philosophically on what is memory, in relation to who we are as selves, because. But anyway, the autobiography is a method of gathering the fragments of ourselves, our lost memories, and forming them into a coherent picture of a whole. And for Augustine, this whole is essentially a God's eye view of Augustine's physical, intellectual, and spiritual development, right? So this autobiography, it begins as a prayer and it ends with a prayer. But when we think of autobiographies, we always think, okay, I guess more in a secular term, I'm going to take fragments of my life and combine them together, and like this is the self. But what Augustine is doing, he's writing an autobiography, but rather than finding himself, he essentially finds God. He's able to distance himself from his life and see all of this as God's work forming in me. It's not me imposing this self onto my memories, onto my life, but rather it's God creating this tapestry of the self, knitting together these memories of his life. And what I find most striking about his Confessions is how raw and honest he is. Augustine is a towering figure in Western philosophical thought, yet he's willing to put the pen to paper and talk about his relationships with his mother, right? Extensive conversations about how he relates to his mom. It's very touching and how much his mom's love him. It really does bring you to tears. Well, sometimes I thought about crying, but I didn't. And not just that, but his friends. How often do we read a biography of a famous intellectual where he talks about his relationship with mom or with his friends, or even more, his lovers, right? Augustine wasn't a Christian most of his life, right? He reflects deeply about his sex life, right? How often do we hear about Einstein's sex life? Never. Right? So this is a towering intellectual figure, and he's putting it all pen to paper, his experience, the most intimate parts of who he is, right? And he even admits in writing, he even admits saying some of the readership might even fetishize his confessions, right? Because it's kind of voyeuristic. Some people might take some twisted pleasure in reading his confessions and all sexual desires and things like that, right? But ultimately, this is a petition to God, not to his readership, and that's how he explains that. But yeah, a large portion of his confessions is devoted to talking about his fight with sexual desire. So the Confessions is an autobiographical work, a theological work, but it's also a philosophical work. Like all great Christian theologians, he uses the best pagan and secular thought to advance the Christian faith and the kingdom of God. And so what I want to do for the remainder of this presentation is really talk about what it means for Augustine to experience God. But I want to first ask you guys, very briefly, what does it mean to experience God in your own life? Or can you come up with any? Go ahead.
Yeah, it means it's that absolute power to kind of break through into the very midst of the time, in where you can do a good action and say stop yourself from engaging in an action that you don't want to be engaging in. It's breaking into that very crux, or that the crux and sada. It's breaking through to get that, to draw out that power to overcome yourself.
This sense of self-transcendence.
Yeah.
And what I like about your response is because it's more philosophically and theologically formed than a typical response. So it's popular in say neuroscience, I guess, to talk about religious experience as something that's testable or comparable to taking hallucinations or those drugs that cause hallucinations, right? So a lot of these scientists, they measure things like, does prayer work, or is drugs give you a sense of divine? But these conceptions, these are modern conceptions of experience that has very little to do with what Christians traditionally have considered what is an experience of God really like. And for Augustine, and I'm going to read an excerpt from Augustine, he takes you on this, his autobiography is also kind of he takes a framework of a staircase, almost like a staircase to heaven, right? He walks you through, in a philosophical way, how he gets from somebody who's an unbeliever to somebody who's a believer, right? And we're not going to go through all the steps, but I want to show you what it looks like for him to actually embark on a quest for the divine, which is simultaneously a quest for the self, right? And I want to drive home the point that the experience of God is not some numinous experience. It's not like it's not like a, how else to put it? Yeah, it's not like taking a drug, right? So all these studies out there that compare them, well, they're not really. You're comparing apples and oranges, right? So I want to just read a passage for a few minutes, and this is one of my favorite passages from the Confessions. So just one second here. And what is the object of my love? I asked the earth, and it said, it is not I. I asked all that is in it, and they made the same confession. I asked the sea, the deeps, the living creatures that creep, and they responded. So Augustine is looking for God, right? He's looking in the world for God. I asked the sea, the deeps, the living creatures that creep, and they responded, we are not your God. Look beyond us. I asked the breezes which blow, and the entire air with its inhabitants said, Anaximenes was mistaken. So Anaximenes is a Greek philosopher who said that air is divine, or air is the nature of reality. Remember in my last presentation, we're talking about the pre-Socratics or the early natural philosophers who said fire was the nature of reality, or air or water, right? So Anaximenes said it was air, and that's why it says, Anaximenes was mistaken. I am not God. I asked heaven, sun, moon, and stars, and they said, nor are we the God whom you seek. And I said to all these things in my external environment, tell me of my God, who you are not. Tell me something about him. And with a great voice they cried out, so it's the world, it's the animals, the creeping things, everything is crying out. He made us. My question was the attention I gave them, and their response was their beauty. All right, so that last sentence there, my question was the attention I gave them, and their response was their beauty. So again, like Heraclitus, it's us giving attention to the world around us that reifies, that brings things into being, and their response to us is their beauty, right? And for Augustine, we know that the world is created because it's beautiful to us. The things of the world don't recognize the beauty of each other. It's only us as a unique human being, the crown of creation, that we can see the beauty in the world, right? And this is I know Chris likes Heidegger. Heidegger draws extensively on Augustine's Confessions because it's this interrogating the created world that informs Heidegger's basic concepts like care, which is like intentionality, right? It's the Dasein, questioning or interrogating the world, right? And it's very Augustinian, although Heidegger was not a Christian, unfortunately. So he's looking around, and no, the sea, no, that's not God. The air, no, the creatures, no, none of that's God. Then I turned towards myself and said to myself, who are you? I replied, a man. I see in myself a body and a soul, one external, the other internal. Which of these should I have questioned about my God, for whom I have already searched through the entire physical order of things, from heaven to earth, as far as I could send the rays of my eyes as messengers? What is inward is superior. Okay. All physical evidence is reported to the mind, which presides and judges of the responses of heaven and earth and all things in them. As they say, we are not God, and he made us. The inner man knows this. I, the mind, through the sense perception of my body. I asked the mass of the sun about my God, and it replied to me, it is not I, but he made me. Right? So you notice, so this is Augustine's assent. It's a philosophical assent to God. Right? He's looking at the world, trying to find the nature of reality, or God. Right? And he's saying, oh, it can't be any of this. Look at the self. Is there anything that's a spark of divinity in myself? And he says, oh, maybe it's my mind. Maybe it's the inward sort of consciousness that's like God, right? What then do I love when I love my God? Who is he who is higher than the highest element in my soul? Through my soul I will ascend to him. I will rise above the force by which I am bonded to the body, and fill its frame with vitality. I will therefore rise above the natural capacity and a step-by-step ascent to him who made me. I come to the fields and vast places of memory. All right, so now he takes us, now it's no longer just the mind. It's something to do with our memory, our reflections, our ability to retrieve memories, the object of memory, the events of our memories, and pull them all together and bring it into the present moment. So again, we have this paradoxical, what's past is now present in memory, right? In memory, we transcend time, right? So it's the self, the mind, it's starting to look more and more like God, but it's always an analogy of God. It's never God. It's always analogical that we can know God. These actions are inward in the vast hall of my memory. There sky, land, and sea are available to me all together with all the sensations I've been able to experience in them, except for those that which I have forgotten. There also I meet myself and recall what I am, what I've done, and when and where and how I was affected when I did it. All right? I'm just going to keep reading a little bit longer. The power of memory is great, very great, my God. It is a vast and infinite profundity. Who has plummeted to its bottom? This power and that of mind in its natural endowments, but I myself cannot grasp the totality of what I am. So there's a sense, and I think it was you, Chris, who alluded to the sense in which, we can reconstruct ourselves out of our memories, right? Like Augustine's Confessions, right? But at the base of it all was who's really doing the reconstructing is God. So even though we forget aspects of ourselves, these forgotten memories are already in the present in the mind of God, right? So anyway, I want to leave it there, and because I wanted to give you guys a sense of what it looks like for Augustine to experience God. It's not like God just experiences or reveals himself in some numinous sort of experience or some drug, right? It really is. It's an intentional. It's a philosophical inward journey to God, right? And I don't know. I just want to leave it at there. And next week, if I present next week, I want to talk a little bit more. I want to see how Augustine takes this journey, okay? Because he makes an ascent to the divine, but there's also a descent, right? There's this sense when you've united with the divine, but then you return back to earth, a transformed human being, right? And it's really great to learn how he conceptualizes a sacramental return to the world from God. Right? So anyway, does anybody have any last thoughts?
Does he say anything about
Well, well, yeah. Well, that's exactly what the confessions. That's exactly what the confessions is all about, right? Because at first it's a quest for the self, but then what's revealed is that really it was God working in me. All right. It's not just fragmented facts that you're collecting and throwing into a book. It becomes reified or it becomes substantiated as a work of God, right? Yeah. Okay.
I'm thinking of things like, I need help with this
Right.
particular thing, and I don't know what to do about it.
Right.
And someone just shows up in my life.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Like things that are unexplainable
Mm-hmm.
otherwise. It's too coincidental.
Right. Right.
That's my.
Well, no, and I think he would, and later in his book, when he starts talking about signs and symbols and how a mundane sort of event or a mundane happening or a mundane object becomes something of cosmic significance, right? And for me to answer that question, or to use Augustine to answer those types of questions, it takes a lot of philosophical sort of discussion to really unpack, like for a Christian, how does something trivial become a message from God, right? How does the mundane become a miracle, right? I mean, so how about we leave that for next week, and then maybe I'll have a better answer for you. But there is a sense when he's talking about language, when he's talking about symbols, is that there's a sense in which things are imbued with cosmic significance, right? Any last? I just want to point out. Oh, the picture's gone. And next time I present on Augustine, I really want to talk about Augustine as a man. Because I don't know if you guys are not really aware, but there's a crisis in masculinity in today's culture. A lot of men, they're floundering around in life. They're dropping out of high school, they're dropping out of university, they're getting told to go to war in the Ukraine. I think a lot of men are going through a real crisis, right? And there's lots of talk online about what it might look like to reconstruct masculinity. And I really think Augustine is a phenomenal model of what masculinity could look like even today. Because when you're thinking about reconstructing an idea, you can't think of it, you can't be reconstructing it out of thin air. If you want to challenge modern ideas, you got to go back to people in other cultures and ask yourself, how did they deal with these problems? How did they wrestle with the questions of masculinity, right? And I think Augustine in particular, especially his conversation about his relationship with his friends, his mom, and his sexual desire, I think it would resonate a lot with men. And he happens to be a towering intellectual as well. So anyway, that's all I want to say for today. Okay?